Hello, I'm John Kneebone and welcome to Mainline Baits Carp Fishing TV, where today I'm going to give you my top 5 tips and ways for balancing out a bottom bait. Okay, so lots of these tips and ways to balance bottom baits are actually quite basic, but what I really want to do now that we've got such an extensive library of rig tutorials on the channel is start filling in some of the gaps, some of the spaces with explaining to you why we're doing certain things and what we're trying to achieve. And tip number 1 really does show one of those fundamentals. And it's quite simply the Snowman Rig. Now, if you want to know how to tie this rig, I'll leave a link down in the description, but it synonymizes what we're trying to achieve with balancing out a bottom bait. We've got a 15mm bottom bait on the bottom of the hair close to the hook, and that's the weight. We've then got a 12mm pop up above that, and that provides the buoyancy. And that's what we're trying to do when we're balancing out bottom baits, is combine just the right amount of buoyancy with just the right amount of weight within a sinking bait, so that when the two are together, they'll slowly sink to the lake bed. But what's more is when fish investigate that area and they begin to feed, that hook and that hook bait is going to fly very quickly into the carp's mouth, and that speed can make it very difficult for that fish to be able to eject that rig successfully, i.e. that hook doesn't get a chance to prick in the bottom lip. But when it reacts as quickly as a balanced bottom bait can do, the hook can turn very quickly, and when it runs across that bottom lip, 9 times out of 10 you're going to get a good hook hold. So we'll just lower this one into the fish tank and you can see the principles that we're looking at. It's going down ever so slowly. And then looking at the two hook baits, we can see that we've got just the right amount of buoyancy and weight between the two, because the hook is actually even held up, it's not even quite flat. Now, as that pop-up takes on just a little bit of water, it probably will go to a position where it's laying down flat. And if that's what you're looking for, what you can do is just gently trim a little bit of pop-up away, just to reduce that buoyancy, so that you're getting that critical balance that you might be looking for. So there we go, that's tip number 1. Let's move on to tip number 2. Now here in tip 2, you can see that I'm using the same rig as I was in tip number 1, and that's the long shank Snowman Rig. But what I've done is I've changed the hook bait. So we're still working on the same principles of combining the right amount of buoyancy and the right amount of sinking properties in the bottom bait, but we've reduced the size of the hook bait. And that's because you may have been looking at that Snowman Rig thinking, well, I'm not really fishing over 15mm boilies or baits of that kind of size. I'm fishing over a spod mix, maybe small particles, pellets, or even fishing solid PVA bags, something like that. And it doesn't mean that you can't still use that combination of a bottom bait and a pop-up, because what I've done here is I've just taken a dumbbell hooker and I've trimmed the top off of that, so I've reduced the size by about 1/3, and then I've added one of our little toppers onto the top of that to add the buoyancy. Just to neaten everything up, I've just gone round the top then with a pair of scissors just to get it all in the same shape and size so it looks nice and neat together. And fundamentally, we've got another Snowman Rig, but it's more of a micro size. And when we put it in the fish tank now, we should see it do exactly the same thing as the Snowman Rig. What we're looking for is it to sink slowly like that. And again, we've got a hook bait that's perfectly poised just off the bottom. The hook is laying flat, and any fish coming over that, whether or not it's feeding over, like I say, small items like particles, pellets, or within a PVA bag, it's not going to have much chance should it suck that in. The hook's going to turn really quickly and get you that strong hook hold. So remember, what we're doing here is we're working on the principle of combining a bottom bait with some buoyancy to give us that perfect combination where that hook bait is going to sink slowly to the lake bed. But this time, for tip number 3, I'm using a hook bait that actually combines both of those properties in one hook bait, and that's the balance wafter. Now, I've got the simple balance wafter rig here. Again, I'll leave a link in the description below if you want to learn how to tie this rig. And it incorporates a size 6 hook. Now, the size of hook bait to match up to that hook is a 15mm size hook bait. But what I've done is I've used an 18mm size hook bait. And the reason that I've done that is that I know I've got too much buoyancy now to the weight of the hook, the rig, and anything within the presentation that's going to help sink that hook bait. And the reason I've done that is so that I can trim that hook bait a little bit at a time until I get just the right amount of buoyancy that I'm looking for. So with this presentation, it's enabling us to be a little bit more precise and get that balance of your hook bait exactly where you might want it. If you want your hook bait to be, if you want your hook to sit flat on the lake bed, you can trim it down a little bit more. If you want your hook to be upright and sitting on the bend of the hook, the point of the hook, then perhaps you wouldn't trim off quite so much. So you start off, don't trim too much off, and then work your way down. So I'll lower this rig into the tank that we can see there. I've got a presentation that's roughly in between the two. It's not sitting flat, it's not sitting upright, but I want it to sit flat. So I'm just gonna take that out. Now the first thing I'm gonna do, because I haven't tested this hook bait yet, is I'm just gonna squeeze it. Little extra tip there for you. If you're using balanced wafters and maybe they're just sitting up that little bit more than what you want, the first thing to do is actually squeeze the hook bait, and you'll just expel a little bit of air out of that hook bait, and sometimes that's all you need to do just to get the right balance. So I've squeezed it. I'm then just going to trim off a little bit more around that hook bait. Not too much, I can always trim a little bit off again in a second. Lower that in, and there we go. That's exactly what I'm looking for. The hook sitting flat on the lake bed and that hook bait poised just above it. Okay, that's tip number 3. Let's switch to the overhead cam so I can show you tip number 4, as well as show you the step-by-step process for tying the whole rig, the whole presentation. So let's run through what you're going to need for this rig. I'm going to use a coated braid for the hook link. I've then got some sinkers. We've then got a medium-sized kicker to go over the eye of the hook. We're using a size 6 curve. It's going to be a blowback rig, so I'm using a rig ring. Then got some scissors for trimming off the tag ends, a baiting needle for attaching our hook bait, and a good old anti-tangle sleeve that's going to help us prevent tangles in the hook link. I'm going to be using a bottom bait. This is a 15mm fruity tuna. Then got a drill, some cork, because yes, you've guessed it, we're going to add some buoyancy for this tip by drilling out the hook bait. Then got a bait stop, and then we've got a pulley tool for just tightening down our knots. Okay, so the first thing to do is prepare our hook bait. So I've taken one of these fruity tuna boilies, just going to insert the drill and just start boring out a hole slowly at first, just so that you don't split the hook bait. And we'll just keep going a little bit at a time, just drilling out that. We're looking to get about 2/3, 3/4 of the way through the hook bait, so not quite there yet. And like I say, there's no rush with this part of the process. Just go a little at a time, keep checking what you're doing, just so that you're not going to split the hook bait. So we're nearly there, just a little bit more. And there we go. That looks about right for me. So we've got a nice clean hole bored into the hook bait, and that's going to be the perfect size for adding some cork. So I'm just going to push that cork again, just carefully, gently. It's really easy to split the hook bait at this point. And then I'm going to trim that off, but as you can see, I'm not trimming that cork flush to the hook bait. I've left a good 4 or 5mm of cork sticking out of the hook bait, and that's so that when we come to test the hook bait and to check the balance of the hook bait, we've got a little bit of cork that we can trim down so we can get the balance absolutely perfect. So the next thing to do is tie our hook link. So I've removed around about 5 inches of the outer coating of the braid so that we can make our hair loop. It's a simple overhand loop. Grab my baiting needle and just pull that second loop and just pull that first loop through the second loop like so, just to form our hair loop. Just pull that tag end just a little bit, just so it's nice and tight. Now we can just grab the scissors, trim away the tag end. There we go. Okay, now I'm just going to dismantle the hook bait by taking out that piece of cork, and then I'm going to put the boilie onto the baiting needle first, like so. Then the cork, and again this is just so that you're preventing the force you're using to get that baiting needle down through that little piece of cork. You're not going to split your hook bait in the process. So it's better to do it like this with the two separate, and then we can just hook on our hook link and the hair, attach the cork, then slide down the bottom bait. Now I'm just going to take a bait stop, put that through the hair loop. There we go. Just pull that hook link down, so that's the bottom bait secured into position. All we need to do now is just slide that piece of cork down the hair, just so it sits back in that hole that we bored into the hook bait earlier. And there we go, that's our hook bait in position on the hair. So now we can determine the length of the rig. So I'm going to take away around about 12 to 16 inches of hook link, just so that I've got plenty to work with. Trim that away. And then now I'm going to take the rig ring. Just a little tip here with rig rings is if you just lick your finger and then push it down on the ring, it'll stick to your finger really well. Like you can see, it's just not falling off at all. Makes it a lot easier for tying the rig. You're not forever dropping the ring and trying to find it again in your bivvy or in the grass or anything like that. So we'll just slide that down the hook link like so, and then we just make a simple overhand knot. Just thread that tag end through that overhand loop, tighten it down, and just have a little check here that the rig ring is in the right position. We just want to snug everything down and just leave that rig ring nice and close to the bottom of the hook bait, just a few mil away like this. That's perfect. Okay, with the rig ring in position, we can now take our hook, and like I said, I'm using a size 6 curve hook. Perfect for this presentation. We just take that hook through the rig ring like so, and there we just want to have that rig ring and the hair just positioned opposite the barb of the hook, and then we can just pinch that so we hold that position, take the tag end of the hook link through the back of the hook, and then we can whip down once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times down the hook. Take that tag end back through the eye of the hook, and there we go, we've secured the hook into position on the hook link with a knotless knot. We've got a nice little bit of exposed soft braid there. That's going to give that rig a nice bit of movement. So now we just need to slide on our kicker. These kickers really help the hook turn quickly in the fish's mouth, and the quicker the hook can turn, the more chance you've got of securing a good strong hook hold. So it just slides over the eye of the hook really easily. This is a medium sized kicker, so like I say, works perfectly with a size 6 hook. And there we go, that's the hook end of our rig pretty much complete. Now just going to take a sinker and I'm just gonna lick my fingers and just add a little bit of saliva down the hook link, just so that it's lubricated, ready for sliding on the sinker. If you don't do this as you slide the sinker down, it can sort of crinkle the coating of the braid, just untidy it a little bit. So I much prefer to just add a little bit of moisture with a little bit of saliva like this, and it just slides down the hook link then really easily. It's not damaging that outer coating. And then I'm just gonna position that sinker just an inch, maybe a couple of inches away from the eye of the hook, and having that little bit of weight there, it obviously helps pin down the rig, but it also helps it turn and flip really quickly as it runs across the bottom lip of the fish. So we can now go to the other end of the rig, thread on our anti-tangle sleeve, get that down onto the hook link, and I'm now going to tie a figure of 8 loop knot. It's a really strong knot, but it's also brilliant for attaching to a quick train swivel. So we just make one big loop, we take that back upon itself to create a second loop, and then just take that first loop behind the second loop, pinch everything nice and securely, take your baiting needle, and then you can pull that first loop back through the second loop like so, and you've created a nice, neat, and like I say, super strong figure of 8 loop knot. Just going to add a little bit of saliva there just to help that knot bed down. Take the pulley tool in the loop, get a good grip. We don't want the hook sliding into our hands or anything. We can pull that knot down nice and tight, and then all we need to do is just trim off that tag end to tidy up this end of the rig. Take the anti-tangle sleeve, slide that up over the knot, just leaving a little bit of that loop exposed. And like I say, really easy to attach to a quick change swivel or pin down in a rig box. So there you go, that's the rig almost complete. All we need to do now is get the correct balance of the rig. So as you can see in the fish tank, the hook is neither sitting upright on the point or flat to the lake bed, and I want it to be flat to the lake bed, and this is why we left ourselves a little bit of room with the cork. So what I've done here now is I've just taken the rig out of the water and I've trimmed that cork just a little bit, retested it, and now the rig is sitting perfectly. The hook is sitting flat on the lake bed, which is what I wanted, but the hook bait is just sitting wafting away just above it, poised and ready to hook hold any feeding fish. Okay, for tip number 5, I've used exactly the same rig that we've just tied for tip number 4, but I've just varied it a little bit by flipping the hook bait the other way up. So instead of boring out the hook bait, inserting some cork and having that cork close to the hook at the bottom of the hair, I've bored out the hook bait, the same size hook bait, exactly the same, but this time I've inserted a small little zigger, so it just adds that little bit more attraction, a little bit of visual attraction, and the sweet attractors that were within that zigger, and I've added that into the top of the hook bait and placed the hair stop just above that, so that will sit above and just add that little bit of visual stimulus. And as with the same presentation we used in tip number 4, it should just sink nice and slow, there we go, down to the lake bed, poised, awaiting the investigation of any feeding fish. That hook's going to quickly fly into the fish's mouth, and the hook point will turn downwards as it goes across the bottom lip of the fish, and you should be into your next bite. Okay, so there we go, there's my 5 top tips for balancing out bottom baits, and just remember we're only really working on one main principle, and that is combining the weight of that bottom bait with some buoyancy to initially give us a rig that's going to slink at a speed that we want it to, and probably quite slowly. So if you're fishing over silt, maybe light weed with a long hook link, and you want that rig to come down really slowly so it presents nicely across that bottom, being able to combine the buoyancy of a pop-up, say, with a bottom bait in a Snowman rig, something like that, that's going to allow you to do that. But what we're also trying to do is then have a rig that's going to react very quickly to the investigation of any feeding fish. It's going to fly quickly into the fish's mouth, and as soon as that fish tries to eject the rig, the hook runs across its bottom lip, it's then going to be able to turn really quickly, and there you go, there's your next bite. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, hit that notification button so you know when our next video is coming out. If you don't yet subscribe to the channel, please hit that subscription button below, we really appreciate it. And for more carp fishing videos, I'll leave links to those here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.